From VOA Learning English, this is the Education Report. Lawmakers in Washington are debating education issues, including the interest rates that students pay for loans. College students who take loans graduate owing an average of $26,000. But some economists say the real issue is controlling the cost of college. Experts say these high costs are hurting the whole economy. For the past 30 years, college tuition has been increasing at twice the rate of inflation. Universities say decreasing financial support from state governments forces them to charge higher tuition. On average, private colleges now charge more than $30,000 a year. Terry Hartle is a spokesman for the American Council on Education, which represents thousands of colleges across the United States. He says funding for education has been shrinking for years. Experts worry that the high cost of education makes it less likely that good students from poor families can attend college. This means fewer scientists, engineers, and others who could help increase economic growth. Also, a survey shows that some students concerned about repaying thousands of dollars in loans are delaying marriage and children. Many cannot afford to invest in a house or buy a car. Georgetown University labor economist Anthony Carnevale says the current system cuts economic growth for the whole country, and the effects are important. He says meeting the demand for workers with higher education could add $500 billion to the American economy. A new government report says 1/3 of Americans aged 25 to 29 now hold college degrees, up from 1/4 in 1995. For VOA Learning English, I'm Mario Ritter.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Americans are considering national education standards recently developed by teachers and other education experts. The National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers led the effort. The United States, unlike other nations, has never had the same school standards across the country. The reason? Education is not discussed in the Constitution. That document limits the responsibilities of the federal government. Other responsibilities, like education, fall to the individual states. Local control of education probably was a good idea 200 years ago. People stayed in the same place, and schools knew what students needed to learn. But today, people move to different cities, and some people work at jobs that did not exist even 20 years ago. Many American educators say that getting a good education should not depend on where you live. They say that some states have lowered their standards in order to increase student scores on tests required by the No Child Left Behind Act. Kara Schlosser is Communications Director for the Council of Chief State School Officers. She says The new standards clearly state what a student should be able to do to be successful in college and work. The standards deal with language and mathematics in every grade, from kindergarten through high school. For example, in first grade, students should be asking and answering questions about something they read. In mathematics, students should be working with shapes in kindergarten and angles in fourth grade. 48 states have already shown approval for the standards. 2 states reject the idea. Critics say that working toward the same standards in every state will not guarantee excellence for all. Some educators in Massachusetts say adopting the proposal will hurt their students because the state standards are even higher. Others say the change will be too costly, requiring new textbooks and different kinds of training for teachers. Still others fear federal interference or control. Supporters say the standards are goals and do not tell states or teachers how to teach. They also say the federal government is not forcing acceptance. However, approving the standards will help states qualify for some federal grant money. And that's the VOA Special English Education Report.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Girls and boys usually attend classes together in American public schools. But there are some single-sex programs, like a girls' public school in Dallas, Texas. It opened in 2004. The students have done well enough that the school system is now opening a school for boys. Nakia Douglas is principal of the Barack Obama Male Leadership Academy. He says he was the kind of student that the school is seeking. I was born and raised in South Dallas by a single parent. I was a neighborhood child. I was that child that I would work if I knew the teacher believed in me. But at the same time, I had a hunger and desire for more. Educational researchers say boys learn in different ways and mature more slowly than girls, and are more likely to leave school. Being in class with the opposite sex can also take attention away from learning. Kendall Keeter thinks the boys' school will be good for his son the way the girls' school was for his daughter. Our thought was to also give our son an opportunity that would best prepare him for college in the same manner she was prepared. And I can't imagine any other option that would have prepared her better. Another parent, Madeline Hayes, also likes the idea of a publicly funded school for boys. This is something, as cheesy as it sounds, that I've always dreamed about. That there will be a boys' school that doesn't charge $25,000 a year, but would give the same academics, the same level of interaction and leadership. The school is for grades 6 through 9. It will offer college preparatory classes and leadership courses even on weekends. Principal Douglas says the boys will be urged to support one another. All of our young men we call brother. So it may be Brother Malik Davis or Brother Samuel Keeter. The young men understand they are their brother's keeper. And so the young men are really learning to be responsible, not only for themselves, but also for their brothers here at the campus. Most students who want to be accepted into the Obama Academy in Dallas will need to have good grades and pass a number of tests. But 10 to 15% will not have to meet all of the entrance requirements. Principal Nakia Douglas says they will have to show they have a strong character and a desire to learn. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. Last week, we told you about a call for American educators to do more to protect students from sexual violence on campus. The government recently sent a letter telling schools, colleges, and universities that such violence is a form of sex discrimination. That means it violates a 1972 law against discrimination on the basis of sex in education programs and activities. The letter says schools must take steps like making sure victims know their rights and are kept informed about investigations. Victims must also be protected if the accused attacker is still in school with them. Ruslan Ali is Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the Department of Education. She and her staff wrote that letter. Our sense of urgency could not be greater, she says. I'm sure any parent in America would say they don't want their child to go to college or school and have to be worried about being raped. And we are going to work with officials to make sure that doesn't happen. One of those officials is Mary Mayhew. She leads efforts to prevent sexual harassment and rape at the University of New Hampshire. That was where Vice President Joe Biden and Education Secretary Arne Duncan released the guidance letter in April. Ms. Mayhew says she believes sexual violence on campuses has actually decreased over the past 20 years. She says schools are getting better at educating students to understand the idea of consent. Or, put more simply, that no means no. She says between 1988 and 2000 was when we really started implementing education campaigns about what consent is. And that did amount to some degree of prevention. Ms. Mayhew says the warning from the government to pay more attention to the problem might lead more schools to start or expand their programs. At the same time, however, it might also lead to an increase in reports of sexual assaults. Not necessarily because the problem has gotten worse, she says, but because more students will know their rights and be willing to report attacks on campus. Ruslan Ali at the Education Department says the government is ready to take action against schools that fail to protect their students. She says where there are violations, and in the case where officials are not willing to comply with the nation's civil rights laws, we will enforce the laws vigorously. For VOA Special English, I'm Carolyn Presutti. If you want to read that 19-page letter, go to voaspecialenglish.com.
This is the VOA Special English Education Report. What is the best way to learn a new language? A small study of foreign language learning in adults compared two methods. One is known as the explicit or classroom method. This is the kind of traditional classroom teaching where students are taught a lot of information about grammar rules. The other method is known as the implicit or immersion method. The idea here is to learn much the way children do when they learn a native language. That is, by being with native speakers and absorbing the language that surrounds them, generally without a lot of explanation. Teachers may combine these two methods into what Professor Michael Ullman calls immersion-style classroom teaching. But is that necessarily a better way to learn a language? Mr. Ullman was the senior investigator for the new study. He is a professor of neuroscience at Georgetown University Medical Center in Washington. He says he was surprised to find that combining the two methods might not help the brain in processing the new language. If he had to learn a language, what would he do? One possibility would be to start with classroom and then go to immersion. But he says there is a possibility that classroom could hurt later immersion. That is one possibility in interpreting the data. The Public Library of Science published the study earlier this year. The 21 adults in the experiment learned Brocanto 2, a 13-word language created for the study. The words and grammar rules relate to a computer game similar to chess that the learners played. For example, Blom Nemo Lu Neep Li Praz means the square Blom piece switches with the Neep piece. The researchers tested the people 3 to 6 months after they had learned the language to see how well they could remember it. The study found that those who had learned it with the immersion method had brain waves similar to those of native speakers of a language when speaking that language. Professor Ullman says those who trained with the classroom method also became more native-like in their brain processing. But only the immersion group showed full native-like processing of the grammar. Still, he says teachers should not make any curriculum changes based on his findings. He says further research is needed. And it may be, for example, that a combination of classroom and immersion might be best. But we don't know that. For VOA Special English, I'm Mario Ritter.
I'm Alex Villarreal with the VOA Special English Education Report. In Giles County, Virginia, the school board has removed displays of the 10 Commandments in its schools. The county thought that posting the 10 Commandments along with the first part of the United States Constitution might help increase moral values. There had been few complaints since the commandments were posted almost 12 years ago. But recently, civil liberties groups had threatened to take the county to court if it did not remove them. The United States Supreme Court permits the 10 Commandments to be on public property so long as the goal of displaying them is not to gain support for religion. But in 1980, the court ruled that the 10 Commandments cannot be shown in public schools because displaying them shows support of religion by the government. Jewish and Christian holy books say the Ten Commandments were laws given to the prophet Moses by God. Many Americans believe the country was founded on Judeo-Christian beliefs. Many of their beliefs are expressed in the Ten Commandments. They are a set of rules against murder, stealing, cheating, adultery, and profanity. Douglas Laycock is a professor of constitutional law at the University of Virginia School of Law in Charlottesville. He says the Supreme Court has ruled that governments must be neutral about religious teachings. He said, putting up the Ten Commandments in a way that promotes the Jewish and Christian scriptures is a violation of the Constitution, and especially if they do it in a public school. Officials in Giles County say they may put the Ten Commandments back on the walls of the schools, but will add other historical documents. Professor Laycock says it is possible that might satisfy a court. Since the Supreme Court ruling in 1980, more conservative justices have been appointed to the court. Professor Laycock says some conservative activists believe this new, more conservative court might be willing to once again permit the Ten Commandments to be displayed in public schools. For VOA Special English, I'm Alex Villarreal. Tell us what you think about religion in public schools. You can comment at voaspecialenglish.com. You can also find transcripts and MP3s of our reports. And you can find us on Facebook at VOA Learning English.